Okay, it's now 12 noon. We're streaming live on Facebook. Both Chris and I would like to welcome you to today's program, which kicks off our series of events in October, which is concluded with our Design Awards program on October the 21st. My name is John Haber. I'm the Field Services Director with the California Preservation Foundation. Today's program is entitled Energy Efficiency and Resiliency Upgrades for Historic Buildings. The format for today's program will include 4 speakers for a total of 30 to 45 minutes, followed by a Q&A and open discussion. You'll notice there's a chat box at the bottom of your screen. You can click on that to let us know throughout the course of the presentation if you have any questions or if you have any concerns or any other issues. You'll also notice that there's a Q&A button next to that chat button. You can use that to ask questions, and Chris and I will field those questions at the end of the presentations. If you're attached to a microphone, you can grant the webinar room voice access to your microphone when asked to do so. Your voice will be muted during most of the presentation, but you can raise your hand by clicking on the raise hand button at the top, at the bottom left-hand side of your screen. Once your hand is raised, we will grant you voice access at an appropriate time. This will allow you to have a short dialogue with the speakers or ask a question in person. If for some reason your sound does not work, you will need to type in your question or response using the chat button. With that being said, I'm going to turn it over to Christine Madrid-French, our Director of Development and Marketing, who will tell us about some exciting programs and other events coming up, including this Friday. We will be having a very special film screening that she'll tell you more about.
Yes, don't spoil the surprise, John. Thank you. I'm going to share my screen and we're going to look at my little slideshow again. Okay, so what I want to do first of all, of course, is I encourage everyone to visit our annual sponsors. All of this information is available on our website. Without you, we couldn't do all these fun free programs. And we have a lot of surprises coming up in October. We also have new award sponsors. I want to welcome especially Quattrochi Quack Architects, who will be speaking at our webinar today, and a lot of your friends are here. These award sponsors are also featured in a new Preservation Expo, which I'll show you in a minute. Don't forget to put this in your calendar. October 21st from 6 to 7:30 is our big award show, where we're going to have some special guests and a lot of surprises for you all. All of the winners are listed on our website. There are 18 winners of the Preservation Design Awards and a person and an organization for the President's Awards. All those details are on the web. This is a brand new thing that we're introducing. It's called Preservation Expo 2020. It's an online trade show, and each one of these sponsors and our annual sponsors receive a booth, a virtual booth. And when you go and you click on any of these, you'll see images, contact information, and video. Also, our upcoming programs include October 13th, is basically every Tuesday, Conservation Approaches to Historic Buildings, and October 20th, Adaptive Reuse in Downtown. And like John said, a special movie night with John and Chris at CPF. We are going to be showing 2 weeks notice, and don't be fooled by Sandra Bullock's cute face. She is actually a preservationist. You can see her on the wrecking ball right there. She is trying to save a building, and Hugh Grant is the developer, and they have a romance over historic preservation. But there's some interesting things that we can talk about with this movie. So John and I will be manning the chat room while we broadcast the movie. That's this Friday at 6 o'clock. So we hope you can join us. Just register on our website. And of course, everything we do is possible because of you. We'd love it if you could donate. It's very easy. And we are going to start a text to donate system in the next few weeks. And you can contact us at any time that you need help. Okay, it's back to you. All of our speakers, you can go ahead and turn on your videos and your audio. Wonderful. Welcome, everybody. I think we got one more. There he is. Hey, Daniel. So welcome, everybody. And we're just going to turn it over to you, and we'll see you on the other side at Q&A.
Okay, so I think that's my cue. I'll go ahead and share my screen. and get this started. There we go. Thank you all so much for having us. We're here today to talk about the historic Alameda High School. I'm Mark Quattrocchi, principal of Quattrocchi Kwok Architects. We're a 65-person firm in Northern California in 2 offices, and we specialize exclusively in educational facilities, of which dozens have been historic school renovations. Also, Chris Del Coro will be presenting with me, principal of Cost Engineers, and Chris and I have done, it seems like decades of schoolwork together. We want to tell you a little bit of background and politics of this project, and then really the kind of goals of restoration, energy, sustainability. I think the more interesting part will be the project challenges and some of our outcomes. So in thinking about this today, it really is a balancing act. I mean, all architecture is a balancing act between the program goals, the client's expectations, budgets. But I find restoration, preservation work to be particularly so, and no more so than this project I'm about to show you. So from the image on the right, Alameda is an island city just across the bay from San Francisco. Very historic community, over 10,000 buildings built before 1930, was the home of the Naval Air Station. So a great history of historic buildings, including, you can see the Art Deco, Alameda Theater, Carnegie Libraries. A very involved and extremely passionate preservation community. Including a really good, the Alameda Architectural Preservation Society we work with. There was a real passion for preservation, though, interestingly enough, also a loud group for demolition, which I'll talk about. We have the wonderful Bay climate, the diurnal swings of the day help us immensely from an energy conservation perspective. The school district was not interested in a LEED or a CHIPS verification status, though we did use the CHIPS scorecard as our own internal measure of our own success in that. And of course, as a public project, Cal Green Title 24 is our minimum standards. So the project's 100,000 square feet, one of the largest restoration school projects in the state, $57 million in over 2 years to build. So in thinking of the topics, in terms of the lens of sustainability, clearly reuse is one of the most critical ones. We're constantly faced in school projects, whether we restore or we demolish, and particularly in historic renovation projects, it's a challenge, and forcing us to look at a lot of balancing that needs to be done. But as I mentioned, there was a very vocal group for the demolition of this school. It was abandoned in 1978, built in 1924. Significant collapse potential, a lot of deferred maintenance, and it was virtually uninhabitable and then deemed unsafe. When we got involved in 2012, there was a call to demolish, causing not just the school, but close the entire campus that exists behind it, these buildings. This would be 1,500 students traveling across the island to the only other high school, a great deal more auto trips, energy consumed, and it's a very neighborhood schools. All the schools of Alameda are very much tied to the neighborhood. It would unravel that. A large amount of embodied CO2 went into the school that would be repeated in new buildings, whether it's this site or the new one, a tremendous amount of waste and energy consumption. We were able to do a cost analysis to show the value that was cost effective to actually restore this building, despite its immense cost of $57 million, and gain support for the restoration work. It was a great lesson on sustainability for students and a very important connection to the history. When we look at the work, once support was had and there was a bond passed for it, the issue of resiliency became paramount. The building was an absolute collapse potential. The remarkable work of the structural engineers, ZFA structural engineers, were pivotal in the success of this project. It was abandoned in '78 because of high liquefiable soils, which is a big problem on the island. A lot of sandy soils underlying this building. Fortunately, there were shallow lenses, which when I talk about the solutions was helpful. We also had significant roof and wall ties and floor and wall tie issues, as well as some concrete leaks. As I mentioned, it was an occupied school. There were students literally leaning up against this building, which could collapse. So in the years of planning, we even had to do some temporary shoring and even a debris fence around the school should it collapse over the years that it took to get the approvals and start construction. The seismic upgrade, we had to remove the floors under the building and then carefully reinstall a lot of the millwork and cabinetry that was affected to provide 6,000 grout injection holes. They're shallow, 30, 35 feet high pressure grout. and then new multi-story steel frames, many of which were hidden inside, as well as upgrades to the foundation. I'm pleased to say, once done, we meet not just current seismic safety standards for such a grand old building, but also fire life safety and accessibility. So to give you a sense of just the significance of this, this is sort of what the first floor looked like throughout the whole building. The floors were removed, drill rigs were brought in, there were even helical piles for the structural upgrade. So this was no simple shoring of the building. It completely opened up the building. You can see some of this, even on the slide on the right, floor being removed at the corridors because of diaphragm issues. So this was a very significant operation. The contractor, Lathrop Construction, were masterful in preserving and saving, and I'll talk about the windows later, so many of those important elements that we could reinstall. And when you see the final photographs, you'd never know this happened. Sort of looking at another topic now, moving away from resiliency to energy efficiency, the envelope. To no surprise, a building this age and abandoned, we had pigeons roosting inside there, a large amount of water and air infiltration, virtually no insulation, but we were able to do new insulation of walls and roofs. Everything was open, so everything could be re-insulated. But I talked about balance a moment ago. The walls were a challenge for us. The building is concrete structure, so walls are concrete and the columns, interior columns. We had plaster, tremendous amount of millwork, chair rails and other things that, should we try to do furring on the inside, would destroy. And so again, that balance was in the name of the restoration. We didn't do wall insulation, but found other ways to make up the energy saving features. I mentioned the windows. So much of Alameda Historic High School is about its windows. It's a big part of the identity of the school, and certainly one identified by the preservation groups of great interest. We did a survey of the windows. There were 350 windows, 6,000 panes of glass. Despite being single glazed, that balance, again, the decision was made to restore these windows as opposed to replacing with new dual glazed windows. It was a significant effort. Again, my compliments to the contractor's ability to remove each of those windows, repairing them. You can see sort of what it looked like on the right, but on the left, this is after the windows were removed. They were staged and brought off site to be restored. These are multi-tiered operators, the most remarkable natural ventilation system, most of which didn't work, all of which were restored. And you can see sort of after the work was done, hopefully you'll agree, despite not being able to provide dual glazed windows, well worth the impact both to the interior of the spaces. This is a wonderful example of how we treated some of the classrooms, providing 21st century learning environments in a very historic setting. But also, of course, what it meant to the outside of the building. So much of this building is about the windows, and I don't think I would have ever felt this was a successful restoration project. Had we not gone through the efforts to restore these windows versus the easier answer of just removing and replacing, including some brilliant doors, wonderful old, horribly damaged bronze, and just that right level of restoration to save the patina. And my last topic before I turn this over to Chris on lighting and daylighting, there was a lot of daylight issues, windows boarded up, skylights missing. We were able to open up these skylights. I've already talked about the windows. So there's wonderful daylighting opportunities, but some of the most abysmal lighting. In the 70s, a very unfortunate lighting retrofit project was done. So some pretty old school fluorescence, a lot of incandescence, but unfortunately, a lot of the great old historic fixtures were gone. We were looking at over 1.6 watts of energy being used per square foot. And when we were done replacing it all with LED lighting, a 63% energy savings just in the lighting alone, never mind what we were able to do with insulation and crisp with mechanical. Omania Meyer is the electrical engineer for this and just did a remarkable job on helping us on sort of historically appropriate fixtures in the public spaces and providing a really good lighting system, including automatic daylight dimming, which I'm sure we're all familiar with. It is with such wonderful daylight, automatically dimming these lights, but also giving teachers that important manual dimming control. Teachers need to have control of their spaces. And then, of course, occupancy sensors and even phantom load switching for places like the office. So the last couple of slides, just to give you a sense of what we started with, just truly a remarkable collection of unimpressive light fixtures. And then using whether they were the existing fixtures, such as this lobby, and upgrading them, or here on the left where there was really unfortunate fluorescent fixtures, finding an appropriate light fixture that was an LED. So all told, these different elements of our work, I think, balanced as well one could with the issues we face with. With that, I'm going to turn this over to you, Chris.
Thanks, Mark.
8 minutes.
Great. So I thought I'd just start off with a quick run through of some of the existing mechanical systems that inhabited this building before we tackled it. You can see from the slide on the left here, just a spattering of window wall AC units, just sporadically placed throughout the building. On the right-hand side, you can see there were 3 old 5 million BTU low pressure steam boilers, literally rusted from the inside out. Only one of these boilers was actually still in operation, but the other 2 were completely decommissioned and completely failed and rotted. Nothing left of them. Next slide. The existing piping system was leaking, rusted, had asbestos insulation. The control system, as you can see here, was just a complete rat's nest of wires and rust, and just nothing left here to work with. The system was at least 50 years beyond its useful life. So really nothing here salvageable. Next slide. You can see here that the existing ducts and plenums were littered with rat and pigeon feces, dust, dirt, debris, just an utter mess. I thought this would be appropriate for my audience. Circa 1920 blower and fan wheel assembly, complete with leather belt. Tells quite a story. Next slide. Just some images of the hodgepodge of equipment that was inside the building. You can see a little through wall AC unit there, a exposed unit ventilator and piping. Next slide. A vintage steam radiator and not so vintage through the wall AC unit. So just a hodgepodge and mishmash of randomized equipment, nothing salvageable. So we were starting with a clean slate. And so what we ended up doing was we added a new 300-ton high efficiency chiller. We replaced those old inefficient boilers with high efficiency condensing water boilers and variable speed pumping. We increased the building's ventilation and ventilation strategies. It literally had none save the operable windows where they did operate. We added MERV 13 filtration to all of the equipment. We replaced those inefficient blower wheels with direct drive fans, and we added a complete energy management system for optimized system and control and localized zone control. So just some images of the chiller plant that we added. I'd like to note that the original design intent was to not have cooling. The owner decided to add cooling about 25% into our design phase. So about a quarter of the way into the design, they threw us a wrench and said they wanted to add cooling. Obviously, we had to respond quickly. There was significant coordination with the structural engineer and the electrical and acoustical engineer and architect. The acoustical engineer had a critical role in this. You can see this, that high wall behind the chiller there is adjacent to the theater. So acoustics were critically important. This unit is heavily seismically isolated as it sits just below a classroom or just above a classroom and adjacent to the theater. So it was really the most efficient and quietest machine that was available. It probably still is. So yeah, quite a challenge. Those old boilers we've replaced with 3 new high efficiency condensing boilers, 2.5 million BTUs each. Some of the new pumping on variable frequency drives and the piping distribution. Those old blower wheels were replaced with these direct drive high efficiency fans, all on variable frequency drives, and a new air handling system down in the basement. And for the ventilation, what we did was we used these energy recovery units. So they have the ability to provide 100% exhaust and 100% supply air into the building. And It has a heat wheel in the unit, which allows the energy to be exchanged between the exhaust air and the supply air. And then to just supplement the heating and cooling, we have chilled and hot water coils in these units just to provide the tempering that we need that we don't get from the heat exchange process. So we were able to route those ventilation ducts largely below the crawl space in the building. The slide on the lower left, you can see a typical classroom unit ventilator. And there on the floor, there are some floor outlets. We were able to route that ventilation air through these floor outlets just in front of the unit ventilators. The unit ventilators are providing the heating and cooling, but we couldn't penetrate the exterior walls for historical reasons and architectural reasons. So the strategy we came up with for delivering the ventilation was through these floor vents. They're coupled to a VAV box and the CO2 sensor. You can see a couple images on the right there. The CO2 sensor allows us to turn down that ventilation when this space is unoccupied or has a low load, which allows us to maximize our energy efficiency. And then also the thermostat as well to provide independent zone control and further additional energy conservation when the system is low load or low occupied. And just that top right image, you can see just the clutter of pipes and ductwork that we had to deal with. Even with the lowered ceiling in this particular area, it was just took a highly coordinated effort here to get all of this into this building. Just some images here, a typical classroom again with the DDC control valve and a typical unit ventilator. And then for the science classrooms, it was classic overhead VAV air distribution with, again, zone control and demand controlled ventilation. And so just in summary, real quick, in some of the numbers, those old boilers, I'm estimating they were probably 75% thermally efficient. We were able to replace those with 95 plus efficiency boilers on these high efficiency condensing boilers. Those old blower wheels, again, I'm just estimating they were probably 70% mechanically efficient. Direct drive fan motors, they're up to 90 plus efficient. The natural ventilation, of course, we talked about adding those energy recovery units. Those can recover up to 70% of energy exchange through those units. The chiller that we added had a 0.53 kW per ton, which is extraordinarily efficient for an air-cooled chiller. And then the use of adding the energy management system provides us a complete optimized energy control, start, stop, and scheduling of all of the equipment, which further enhances the overall integrated system efficiency. So in 6 minutes, there's 6 years.
Oops. Thank you, Chris. Well, thank you very much for this. Just in closing, this has been a remarkable journey for all of us. This grand neoclassical revival building. The last phase for us will be the 1,000-seat theater, which in a future phase will be restored. It's the only piece of this building that wasn't yet addressed. The site upgrade work was done, but not the restoration. So feel free to reach out to us if there's comments or questions, and I will turn this over to you. Yeah.
Okay. Well, hello, everybody. Jeff, you'll throw up the presentation for us.
Okay.
Great. Well, do you want to put it on full screen mode, please?
Yeah.
Great. Well, hey, everybody. My name is Daniel Backman. I'm a principal and the higher education practice leader at TLCD Architecture, and I'm joined today by Jeff Blavowit, principal and engineer at Goodman and Blavowit Consulting Engineers. And we're here to talk to you about the Burbank Auditorium Modernization Project at Santa Rosa Junior College. This is a really exciting, wonderful project for a lot of reasons from a preservation and design standpoint, but we're here today to talk about sustainability and energy efficiency features. And this project is a ZNE, that's Zero Net Energy Ready project. So Jeff's going to take you through some of the energy and sustainability features, but first I'm going to give you a little context for the project. Next, please. Next. So for those of you who aren't familiar, Santa Rosa Junior College is located in Sonoma County in Northern California. It's a really remarkable campus. Unlike, there's very few like this here in California. It has a kind of red brick collegiate style architecture, with 5 of the original 1930s buildings that were created under the WPA still remaining. And Burbank is probably the most prominent of these, by virtue of being the largest, its location on the campus, and because it's a theater, it really is that site of community engagement for the project. And so the school district chose it as the first major project of its current bond measure. And our task here was to create a sophisticated and contemporary performing arts center while preserving and restoring the integrity of this truly revered building. And another part of that was, creating a more welcoming entry sequence and creating an addition that could accommodate a secondary theater while kind of working within the context of the campus. Next, please. Next slide, Jeff.
You should be seeing it.
Thanks.
Nope.
Oh, yep, got it. So here you can see the kind of marriage of the old and new. We really carefully restored the red brick exterior of the building. We replaced the roof, some of the windows, though unfortunately not all. But really, most of the action is on the inside of the original building. Meanwhile, we created a new structure. Next, please. That really, we wanted to create this balance between old and new and create something that was architecturally distinct from the original, while picking up on some of the textures and materials that make this building and this campus so distinctive. So you can see that instead of the running bond red brick that characterizes the most of the campus, we contrasted that with a stacked pond gray brick. And you can see the way the terrace structure kind of ties together to the two buildings, creating a very welcoming, accessible entry sequence. Next, please. Moving to the interior, there's very little of the historic fabric of the interiors remaining. The building had been through multiple renovations over its 80-year history. So we really took the interior of this building back down to its concrete walls and kind of completely recreated it, reprogramming, completely reconfiguring the circulation, introducing contemporary materials, sophisticated technology, and energy efficient building systems. This here is the lobby, which we doubled in size. It was formerly a very kind of cramped and dark space. And we really wanted to create this as the kind of welcoming front door of the campus. Next, please. Here we see the main auditorium. This space too was a grand space that was really underperforming. It had a kind of very low slope floor that resulted in poor sight lines, virtually non-compliant accessible seating requirements, and the theatrical systems were essentially clouded. They were directly in the audience sight line, which was really hampering the audience experience. So we completely took this space down to zero, as you'll see in some of the construction photos. Built a steeply raked seating system that provides great sight lines from everywhere in the house, great accessible seating locations in multiple spots, circulation pathways that really work for both the audience, the performers, and the technicians. And we moved all the catwalks and lighting positions and AV stuff up into the attic, out of the audience's sight line, so that the technicians could do their work in a kind of optimized setting without disturbing the audience experience. Next, please. And here's just a taste of what the new 200-seat studio theater looks like. This is a much more technical space. It's intended for more experimental theater in the round, and it also is flexible enough to serve as a multi-purpose kind of lecture hall in addition to hosting performances. So just want to give you a taste of what the renovation process looked like. The two slides above show the scaffolding system within that main auditorium. There was, like I said earlier, there was very little of the original character of the building aside from that proscenium archway, which was carefully restored. But really the task at hand was trying to get all these new systems, which are really far more complex than what was existing, and fit them into a really constrained envelope. And you can see in some of those lower slides, the layering of piping, ductwork, conduit, that all had to fit within these existing spaces, trying to maintain the high ceilings needed for performance and rehearsal spaces, while essentially really bulking up the amount of services and infrastructure running through it. And that all went to serve to creating a more comfortable, more efficient, more acoustically sound, and easier to use facility in terms of the building systems. And so I'm going to hand it off to Jeff here, and he can talk a little bit more about that process.
I'm going to go back to your this slide here. We actually used 4 different types of displacement ventilation in the theaters. You can see 2 of them here. Up here, you see these round ducts. They actually have 360-degree perforated diffusers in them. So those are one form of displacement. Another form is a sidewall displacement system here, because we couldn't get air underfloor in this section or at the back. But in the middle section, we actually have floor diffusers, which you'll see shortly. And in the addition, we have displacement diffusers in the risers as well, which you'll see in some of the drawings that I'll show you in a second. The original building had a EUI of about 83, including obviously using natural gas for heating and domestic hot water. And that was our starting point. We looked at measures to make the building zero net energy by looking at insulation. The areas in green were insulated already, and the other colors were areas we looked at for adding insulation. Similarly with the walls, a lot of the walls were uninsulated with brick. And we looked at each situation and determined whether we were going to add insulation or not to those areas. And also on the glazing front, we were able to replace some of the glazing on the building, but not all of it. And obviously, we tried to preserve the historic windows as much as possible. On the equipment side, we did keep some of the equipment. These 2 air handling units on the roof were fairly new. And so we just upgraded them with variable speed drives and controls. The air handling units that we added to the building were mostly 100% outside air heat recovery units for the shop area, the auditoriums, and the restroom areas. So here you can see the floor diffusers in that one section and the sidewall displacement diffusers over here. And here are the overhead cylindrical displacement diffusers. In the addition, we have the risers supplying air, and we're pulling air out at the top of the space so it gets fully stratified, and we get the best delta T through the space.
And I'll just add about the displacement air that, is really critical, not just for increasing user comfort, but also for improving the acoustics of the space, which prior to this project were really dismal, and it was impossible to focus on the performances with the air howling inside the room. So this has been a big upgrade for them in terms of the audience experience, in addition to the efficiency of the system.
So after the project was already submitted for DSA, the college decided they wanted to, go for the gold, so to speak, on the geothermal, and so we did a follow-on package where we demolished the existing chiller and the boilers and the domestic water heaters, and we added a 6-pipe heat recovery chiller. And and this was an interesting point, that there was actually more space in the mechanical room, I think afterwards, than there was before. Daniel, you want to say something?
No, you covered it.
Now, we were lucky on this project that we have a central campus photovoltaic system, which we could get some credit for on our project, 385 kilowatts worth actually. And this slide just shows some of the costs of residential PV, commercial, and then utility scale PV. It gets pretty affordable when you go to that scale. Now, this is the sort of the key of the whole thing here. This slide showing these are the various energy measures that we had for the envelope. And you can see we saved a few percentage points on each one in terms of the energy use index. And then, when we added the geothermal, we added about 10% more and basically got off the natural gas. And overall, with everything included, we were about a 25% reduction in the energy use index. And then once we added the PV, we basically had 100% offset of our energy use. And then looking at it from a carbon point of view, a similar kind of table here. We had about a 22% reduction in carbon before the photovoltaics came into play. And looking at it from a bar chart, these were all the various measures that contributed. And then finally, when we took credit for the PV, we got down to net zero. And we also did a life cycle cost analysis of some of these measures. And this is something which is not always going to show, a developer type of payback on, but there are very good life cycle cost savings to be had from this overall approach. So looking at the geothermal system in a little bit more detail here to help you understand, this geothermal system here was here already serving Bertolini Student Center. And but it was oversized, so we did some analysis and we determined that we could add this building to the existing geothermal system without changing the field. These are the Annalee, Garcia, Burbank, and Forsyth of the 4 buildings which we put onto a new geothermal system, which we looked at in a few different sites, including the parking lot over here, the Bailey Field Athletic Center, and also the front lawn. And this plan shows all the utilities that are running around that we had to navigate past with our geothermal system. Here's the geothermal field layout in Bailey Field. We did look at a site on the front, but didn't do that in the end. And one of the key things is really to do a thorough analysis of the loads. So this was Bertolini, where we really evaluated what the existing loads were and what the field could handle. And then we also looked at the other buildings, Annalee, Pioneer, Garcia, Forsyth, to evaluate how much field they would require. And then Burbank, as it was, Burbank improved, and a couple of combinations of projects there. So just running through that really quickly, but I'll stop there and open it up for questions.
Yeah, and one thing I'll just say in summation is, I think what we did with the Burbank building itself is remarkable, but I think looking at the campus as a whole, and especially as a campus that is so revered for his kind of its character and for the preservation of these older buildings, working these new state-of-the-art energy systems into that context is really challenging, but it's really worthwhile, and the SRJC district is really, I think, exemplary in leading the charge on that. They're also, not only doing the geothermal system and the solar system, but they're working on creating a more resilient electrical grid so that this campus can really stand on its own in increasingly challenging times in terms of the reliability and availability of power and energy.
That's right. They do deserve a lot of credit for for their microgrid and their batteries that they've got on site there, and are really overall comprehensive approach on the campus.
Great. Thank you both. Now, if we can have the other two speakers jump on with their video as well, we can start with the question portion of today's program.
Yes,
Chris,
thanks so much for everything, you all. But we have a very important question, John, the first one, obviously. What is Mark's dog's name?
Oh, I forgot to introduce Hope. I've learned long ago the best way to show a headshot is to include a dog with you, because nobody stops to look at you, and you just look better with a golden retriever. She's asleep at my feet right now.
Francesca was asking. John, do you want to take the first question?
Yeah, I don't mind taking the first question. So I think a lot of the questions were answered by Mark in the Q&A box, and I want everybody to review through those because they were very good answers in terms of some interesting questions, and maybe later we'll sort of review some of them. But I could start off with a question of my own, which is actually for Mark and Chris in terms of the mechanical systems. I remember, Chris, you showing us these interesting historic mechanical systems with leather belts and everything. And I was wondering if the school ever thought of maybe interpreting those or providing a space for students to view them and think about the guts of the building and how historically buildings operated and how they do today and how you would change what was done historically.
I'll make a first pass at that and let Chris respond. It's a great question, John. I have a number of projects where both the IT side, the main distribution frames, and the mechanical. In this case, it's in a basement, and so it would have been impossible actually with accessibility requirements. But I love the idea of making our schools part of the learning environment. We have schools where we even use photovoltaic glass in places that students can see it, again, as part of making the building part of the learning environment. For the HVAC equipment, there was just no way. I know, Chris, you're getting to add to that.
Yeah, and obviously the size of this equipment is unwieldy, so trying to find some place to display that could be challenging. But oftentimes in these historic restorations, they do have an archive room where we are able to display some of the finer elements of the systems that were once in place. So that would be a location where we could do that. I think we had that room.
We did that, yes. Chris and I did that at a similar, it was a 1924, also a neoclassical Napa high school. And they called it the history room. We retained the original boiler and all the original, the wood floors and all. But I couldn't agree with you more about our connections to history and understanding for students. It's not just magic that makes the rooms hot and cold, but there's real science behind it.
Right.
And a question, go ahead, Chris.
Oh, I was just going to say, you can take the next one, John, but I was just going to follow up on that. And considering that with windows opening and closing, a lot of the schools, I went to an old school built in the 1930s, and you could still open and close the windows. I mean, how was that, even though I know you finished this restoration before our current situation, do you feel how that's something that we should be talking about more with these historic buildings that have that quality?
Categorically. It's a conversation that I'm certain that Jeff, Dan, Chris are having with our school districts right now. The real worry is, of course, with aerosolized spray, with classrooms. And so outdoor learning environments are becoming more and more popular. And of course, what can we do in our classrooms? Operable windows has always been an important part of learning environments from my perspective for natural ventilation. It's critical now, along with outside air and MERV 13 or better filters as well. Chris or Jeff, you may have more to add to that.
Yeah, I just want to add that the displacement ventilation system in the auditoriums there really, I think, is the best way to handle outside air ventilation in an occupied space like that. So it's I think that is universally a good way to do things.
Yeah, there's no disputing that the solution to pollution is dilution, particularly with COVID and aerosolized communicable disease. So having the ability to introduce large amounts of outside air really helps minimize and works in conjunction with minimizing the spread of infectious disease. And operable windows, I'm a huge proponent of. unfortunately in California, well, fortunately or unfortunately, we have to do control interlocks to shut off the mechanical if we open the windows. But I'd much prefer to have a window open than a duct blowing on me. So it's nice to have both.
So there were a number of questions about the notion of embodied energy and how you as architects and engineers work with your clients on trying to explain how saving these buildings is a much better proposition for the environment, even if it requires some greater upfront challenges. So how do you as architects and engineers explain that to your clients?
I mentioned it for Historic Alameda High School because it was part of a 9-month process, probably a year-long process of candidly convincing. There were many who were convinced, there were many who were not. So I'll answer that question in a broader spectrum, that we use not just the value of historic restoration, sustainability from waste, but looking at the tremendous embodied CO2 that's in this building in its creation, and losing that and doing it again in a new building. And then the tremendous amount of energy that's spent in providing, transporting, and installing all these new materials, the additional greenhouse gases. It became part of our narrative to the community, who were still wrestling with, is it worth $57 million? Can we deal with the tax that this provides? What will the classrooms look like when it's all done? How could you possibly teach 21st century learning environments in a 1924 classroom? Embodied carbon and energy use were all part of that conversation. And when done rationally with time, I was delighted at the responsiveness that they got it. And that was an important part of that conversation. People get it.
Yeah, we were fortunate at Santa Rosa Junior College that the college always intended to preserve the building. The Burbank itself and the other heritage buildings there are such an important part of the campus's identity. And in fact, you see in the more contemporary buildings on campus that they've tried to, both our firm and the other firms that have worked on campus have really tried to reflect that identity in the choice of materials, in the massing. It really is key to who Santa Rosa Junior College is. And you'll even see that the kind of cast concrete seal that appears above the front entry of the Burbank building has now been recreated and kind of utilized as an element elsewhere on newer buildings. So there was never a thought of getting rid of it for that reason, but obviously there's a big benefit too in terms of the embodied energy. And it's a stoutly built building that unlike Alameda we found to be in pretty good shape in terms of the building structure. It didn't require a seismic retrofit, though we did do some selective, structural upgrades throughout the building to make sure that it would, last, another 80 years.
That's wonderful. I have more of a comment from Mark in Salinas. He says he'd love to introduce the panelists to the Old County Jail in Salinas, which is on the National Register and California Registers for its association with Cesar Chavez. The building was also built in the 1930s and seems very similar to the high school, and it needs similar salvation. Are any of you familiar with this building?
I am not, but I'm intrigued with just the description.
Mm-hmm. Mark, maybe you can post it if you're still up there in the chat. Maybe you could post a couple more details or in the Q&A, and we can ask about that.
Okay.
Because it sounds pretty interesting. Okay, so you next, John?
Yeah, no, I was just going to say one thing to add to Mark's comment is that he thought that, and maybe this leads into a question for our panelists, is with the Old County Jail, he thought that the building was built structurally ahead of its time, and that there should be a thorough analysis of its structural strength before the county proceeds with demolition. And maybe as panelists, you can talk a little bit about sort of the benefit, the upsides of historic buildings from a structural standpoint, and also the downsides, and how you deal with those.
I mean,
I've been talking too much. I'll let you go.
Yeah. I mean, we saw some really interesting things with the structure. Being built in the 1930s, it was a mix. It was an interesting mix of concrete exterior walls, a steel roof structure, above the main auditorium, but the rest of all the kind of interior walls and the remainder of the roofs were all constructed out of wood. So it really is a kind of hybrid structural system. And interestingly enough, when you go up into the attic of the space you see behind me in the main auditorium, you see that the Carnegie steel mark is still on all those old steel trusses. So that was a really nice thing to see from a historic perspective. One interesting thing is we ended up having to replace not just the entire rigging system, but the gridiron structure that supports the rigging system. And ultimately, we are able, because it was structurally insufficient for the kind of contemporary use of the theater. Ultimately, we put back the exact same size steel members, which was really beneficial because if we had to upsize members, we would have had a lot of challenges in terms of the fit and anchorage of that. But ultimately, the steel strength today versus 80 years ago is different, is substantially greater enough that we're able to basically achieve a significant strengthening without changing member sizes.
The only thing I'd add to that, I, as I say, I've done probably 24 historic school restorations. Schools are such a unique building type because we have to comply with the Division of State Architects of the site, and it's true also for Dan with the JC with the Division of State Architect standards. So it's not always an advantage. We have real challenges on our schools that are pre-Field Act. Some built before 1933 when the Field Act was implemented. And so it's a lot of testing that's required, both core samples and excavations and x-rays. But usually if done, and again, working with experienced engineers as we did with ZFA, who know how to work with that. Somebody asked a question about the State Historic Building Code. I was trying to answer. We actually were able to use the State Historic Building Code, which only recently we were able to successfully do with schools. We were able to use some diagonal sheathing for shear strength as well as some accessibility. So it's a challenge with public schools, but I think if you persevere and you see the remarkable value of what this school provides, it's worth the effort. The easy answer is to demolish. It is seldom the right answer.
And I'll also answer Catherine's question. And hello, Catherine, fellow Petaluma here in the room. The Burbank project was not subject to the State Historic Building Code. The buildings on the Santa Rosa Junior College campus are not technically historic buildings. So we reside in a kind of gray area there. They're not listed on any local, state, or national registry. But the college gives them the respect that a historic building merits. But we did have some greater kind of flexibility because of that.
Great. And there were a few questions about the unique differences of educational institutions versus, say, other types of public projects or even private projects. And some of the questions were about sort of the energy requirements for local, for the school districts. But then also, especially with large institutions, and public universities and things like that, they sort of, in terms of regulatory ways, they go by their own standards and they sort of set their own. So how can you tell us a little bit about working with either the school districts or the state schools on how to negotiate these different regulations and requirements? I think there were a lot of questions about that.
Yeah, I see a few here, both about the State Historic Building Code and energy codes. I will say that for community colleges and K-12, they're very similar. At the university level, there are some differences, but answering that question more directly, one of them was, is there a free pass on energy requirements? And no, not at all. We are held to this just as restrictive of the standards as if you were building that as a private project.
Probably higher.
Sorry?
Higher.
Yeah, actually higher, exactly, yes. Yeah. There was also part of that question, sorry, it just disappeared. Oh, about exempting ourselves from local zoning. The one thing about these projects is we are exempt from local, both building and planning. We get to trade that in for the Division of State Architect, the State Fire Marshals, Department of Education, and DTSC and a variety of other acronym agencies. it is a labyrinthian, complex process. Schools are held to a much higher standard, even in accessibility, than I've seen in private sector work.
Yeah, and to answer the last part of your question, DSA doesn't get involved in historic preservation at all, to my knowledge. And in fact, we did on the Burbank project have to get a kind of alternate means and methods approved by them for a really interesting feature, which is the smoke vents above the stage, which is a requirement in case of an emergency, that to allow the stage to kind of vent smoke and allow the audience to rapidly exit. This building is unique, fairly unique, in that it has vertically oriented smoke vents. Typically, you find them within a flat roof, but these are in located in the sidewalls of a kind of doghouse up on top of this stage roof. This is a system that essentially is not. There's no formal approval for this anywhere in the code or in the UL listings, and we had to work collaboratively with DSA to basically allow for a vertically oriented smoke vent, because the alternative would be to have been torn apart the whole roof of the stage tower, which was untenable from a cost and structural perspective, as well as a preservation perspective. So that was one of the most unique challenges of the building and the approvals process.
I just wanted to mention that I put in the chat a link from Mark about the Monterey County Jail in Salinas, if anyone wants to check that out. And we're coming up to almost the end. So I didn't know if we wanted to, I wanted to find out, like, how can people get in touch with all of you? So if they're interested in your works, you want to go ahead and give us some of your websites, and we can put that in the chat for everybody.
Great. And I think it's on our presentation, but for Chris and myself, just go through our website, qka.com would be the great way, or I'm markq@qka.com.
Oh, that's wonderful.
Okay, and I'm adding into the chat right now if you want to contact me, and I encourage you to check out our website. It's www.tlcd.com.
And we're gb-eng.com on the web.
And we're costaengineers.com.
You all have amazingly easy websites. I do have maybe some final questions to close out with her. I wanted to make sure I got to these, but one was from Diane, and she's saying, in working with the La Jolla Post Office, a WPA project, there was a federal requirement to double the amount of concrete and steel to provide work for material manufacturers. How does this use of materials, twice the amount of concrete and steel, influence the embodied energy calculations versus replacement with the new building?
This is an interesting statement, the federal requirement to double the amount of concrete and steel. I have no doubt that the federal requirement held them to a higher structural safety standard, but the statement of doubling the amount, I'm not certain I follow that. Even if they were to replace this building, I don't know this building clearly, with new, those same safety standards and structural performance requirements would exist, and therefore the same amount of steel and concrete would be required. So I would still argue, without knowing the project, you still use considerably less material by working with what you had than starting anew. It would be difficult to convince me otherwise.
Great. And then finally, another question related to that is, especially for Alameda, how would just kind of muse here on the possibility of, say, the building was demolished, how would that classroom space be different?
I'm so glad you got to this. I almost asked about that. It's a great question. I know we've only got a minute left. We had to explore that, of course, along with all the other, if it was wise to reuse this building. The classroom size, the one saving grace, the sizes were correct. Most of these old buildings have classrooms of 600 to 700 square feet, and a modern classroom is 960 square feet or more. There are amenities that we do in new schools, such as connections between classrooms, breakout spaces. We had limited numbers of those, but as you saw from that one photograph of the interior, they're very modern interiors in terms of the AV, lighting, the variable acoustics. So we made this have many of the features I do in my new classrooms, even connections between classrooms with doors. I think the only limitation might have been some of the more flexibility of classrooms that combine. Even the science lab are absolutely state-of-the-art science classroom labs. We took these giant old abandoned shops and made giant science labs out of them. They're absolutely meet 21st century standards.
Great, thank you, Mark.
You bet.
And with that, I will close this out here. While I'm closing us out, I'm going to type a link into the chat box here, and that will allow you to leave feedback for today's program. So don't forget to do that. That lets our speakers know how they did, but more importantly, it also lets us know how what you'd like to see in our future programs. And as a reminder, this is the first in part of 5 parts. So I encourage you, if you haven't signed up for the remainder of these portions for the rest of October, you can go back to our website and sign up for the remainder just by clicking on the register button. Did you have anything to add, Chris?
I want to thank everybody for helping us out today and sharing all of your information about these buildings. They're incredible projects, and we really appreciate your contributions to saving California architecture.
Thank you for having us.
Yeah, this was really great. Thanks for having us as well.